At my wedding reception, my mother Helen took control of the planned video presentation and announced, "I've redirected your honeymoon funds. A talented teacher like you should invest that money more wisely." My heart froze in my chest as I checked my bank account and saw it was completely empty. Gregory's next words made her instantly regret everything. I knew my mother Helen had always disapproved of my career as an elementary school teacher, but I never imagined she would sabotage my marriage before it even began. It was my wedding day, a day I dreamed about for years, surrounded by my third grade students, fellow teachers, and closest friends, until she hijacked the reception program and made an announcement that sent waves of nausea rolling through my body. I can still see the satisfied look on her face, that familiar expression I'd seen throughout my childhood whenever she thought she knew best. My wedding planner Rebecca, who had been acting strangely all day, dimmed the lights and started a video titled, "A Mother's Greatest Gift," as beautiful childhood photos of me and my mother played across the screen. Helen's voice narrated with practiced emotion about making difficult decisions for those we love most. The gathered guests watched in confusion as the heartwarming slideshow suddenly shifted to financial charts and investment projections. Helen stood up, taking command of the moment, and with the polished confidence of her former executive career, said, "I have made a significant decision regarding Catherine's future. After 30 years in real estate, I know that a teacher's salary will never provide the lifestyle my daughter deserves. So I've taken the liberty of redirecting their honeymoon funds into much more appropriate investments." The reception hall fell completely silent. I laughed nervously, thinking this must be some elaborate, tasteless joke, the kind of controlling behavior my mother had exhibited throughout my life, but surely wouldn't display on my wedding day. But then she continued, her voice growing more self-assured with every word. "Why waste all that money on a frivolous trip when there are real opportunities to secure Catherine's future? That money is much better managed by someone with actual financial expertise, by me." A few parents of my students exchanged uncomfortable glances, while my fellow teachers stared in horror. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone, maybe Gregory, maybe me, to stand up and declare this wasn't happening. My stomach clenched into a painful knot as I turned toward Gregory, my architect fiance, expecting to see the same shock and confusion I felt coursing through my body. Instead, I saw something different. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the table, so hard his knuckles had turned white, and a look of quiet fury I'd never witnessed before. My heart hammered against my ribs like it might break through. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone and quickly opened my banking app. The screen blurred before my eyes as I tried to focus, and that's when I saw it. The honeymoon fund I'd been building for 5 years, saving a little from each teacher's paycheck, completely drained, vanished. Every single dollar. The money we had saved, the contributions from my students' families, the wedding gifts from colleagues, all of it gone. My vision swam with hot tears. My hands felt like ice. "This can't be happening," I whispered, the words catching painfully in my throat as I turned to Gregory. "Please tell me this isn't real." He exhaled slowly, the controlled breath of someone fighting to maintain composure, and checked his own account. His face darkened with a storm of emotion I'd never seen before. "My account is empty too," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Helen was still standing there, looking expectantly around the room as if waiting for gratitude, as if she had done something worthy of praise rather than stealing our dreams. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to overturn the table and demand answers. But before I could gather my scattered thoughts, Gregory rose to his feet with deliberate calm, and what he said next made Helen instantly regret everything. I could feel every drop of blood draining from my face, leaving me lightheaded and dizzy. My hands turned to ice, my stomach twisting into knots that made me wonder if I might actually be sick right there at my own wedding reception. 5 years of careful saving. From my teacher's salary, thousands of dollars I tucked away month by month, plus the generous wedding gifts from fellow teachers, students' families, and friends. All of it gone in an instant. Gregory clutched his phone with such intensity, I feared the screen might shatter beneath his fingers. His face was a mask of controlled fury that I'd never witnessed before, but his silence spoke volumes. sending shivers racing down my spine. Helen, my own mother, continued standing before our guests with that familiar self-satisfied expression I'd seen throughout my childhood whenever she'd overridden my decisions for my own good. She actually looked proud of herself, as if she'd performed some noble act of maternal love. Then Gregory stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The way he looked at Helen made my breath catch. I had never seen such steely determination in his eyes before. His expression was razor sharp, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched visibly along his cheekbone. Helen, he said with deliberate slowness, his architect's precision evident in each carefully measured word. Exactly what have you done with our money? Helen sighed dramatically, brushing an invisible speck from her expensive designer dress, as if this conversation was beneath her. Oh, please, stop being so theatrical, she said, rolling her eyes like I was still her 12-year-old daughter questioning her authority. I've simply redirected the funds to where they'll actually serve Catherine's future. She's wasted enough of her life on teaching when she could have followed me into real estate. It's time she started making adult decisions about her finances. She smiled, with saccharine sweetness, as if actually expecting gratitude for this breathtaking betrayal. Gregory inhaled deeply, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from restraining his anger. Where exactly is the money now, Helen? I already knew the answer deep in my gut. She let out another exaggerated sigh, acting as though we were being hopelessly unreasonable. Then she announced, loud enough for every guest to hear, I've placed it in my investment portfolio, of course. I needed it for some extremely important opportunities that Catherine is too financially inexperienced to appreciate. The sheer audacity, the absolute unmitigated nerve. The reception hall erupted in hushed whispers and gasps. Several of my fellow teachers exchanged horrified glances. Parents of my students looked mortified on my behalf. My closest colleague Melissa sat, with her mouth hanging open in shock. I clenched my fist so tightly that my nails cut half moons into my palms, the sharp pain grounding me in this surreal moment. You stole our honeymoon fund, I said, my teacher's voice, the one that could quiet a classroom of rowdy third graders, now quavering with emotion. Money I saved for 5 years for my teaching salary. Helen laughed dismissively. Stole? She repeated, as if I'd told a particularly amusing joke. Don't be so melodramatic, Catherine. You've always had a flair for the dramatic, even as a child. I'm your mother. I'm investing in your future because that teaching job will never provide what you deserve. You should be thanking me for stepping in before you wasted it all on some frivolous trip. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin around me as rage and disbelief collided in my chest. Gregory, however, remained eerily composed. He pulled out his chair again, sat down with deliberate calm, and leaned forward with his elbows on the table, the same posture he used when explaining complex architectural concepts to clients. Helen, he said with chilling composure, I want you to explain, in detail, exactly what you've done with our money. Helen brightened, clearly misreading his calm as acceptance. Well, she said, ticking points off on her manicured fingers, I've settled some outstanding investment debts. Then I put a substantial deposit on a premium property in the lakeside development. You know how I've been eyeing those exclusive units for ages. And oh, her face lit up with genuine excitement. I've booked myself a well-deserved European river cruise. You'd be impressed, Catherine. I've secured the master suite with private balcony. After 30 years in real estate, I deserve some luxury. She described stealing her honeymoon and replacing it with her own with such casual entitlement that it took my breath away. Gregory exhaled slowly through his nose, his fingertips drumming a measured rhythm against the table. Then he did something that startled me. He smiled. But it wasn't his warm, loving smile. It was the kind of smile that architects reserve for contractors who've made a catastrophic error and don't realize it yet. That sounds wonderful, Helen, he said deliberately. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Helen faltered slightly. What do you mean by that tone? Gregory leaned forward. I mean, it's fascinating that you've spent money that legally doesn't belong to you. Because do you understand what that actually means? The reception hall fell completely silent. Gregory reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen several times, then turned it around, so Helen could clearly see what he was doing. He was calling Trevor, our financial advisor. "Hi, Trevor," Gregory said, his eyes never leaving Helen's face. "I need to report unauthorized access and fraudulent transactions from both my account and Catherine's teacher retirement fund." Helen's smug expression vanished instantly. Her eyes widened with genuine alarm. "Gregory, what do you think you're doing?" Gregory continued as if she hadn't spoken, his voice carrying clearly in the silent reception hall. "Yes, I need to immediately dispute several unauthorized transfers totaling over $15,000. He listened briefly, then nodded. "Absolutely, I know exactly who's responsible. I can provide their full name, address, and account information right now." Helen lurched to her feet so violently that her chair crashed to the floor behind her. "Gregory, stop this nonsense immediately. You can't possibly." "Oh, I absolutely can," he replied with that same unsettling smile. "You see, Helen, you're not an authorized user on either of our accounts. You don't have legal access to our money, which makes this textbook financial fraud. And Trevor here specializes in handling these exact situations." Helen's face flushed a deep crimson that spread down her neck. Wedding guests were now openly staring. Several of my fellow teachers had their phones out, documenting everything. Gregory tilted his head slightly, the way he did when explaining a particularly complex architectural concept. "I'm curious how this will impact your real estate license when the bank's fraud department completes their investigation, and I should probably contact that river cruise company directly, since those reservations were made with stolen funds from an educator's retirement account." Helen gasped, pressing her hand against her chest. "Gregory, I'm Catherine's mother. You wouldn't seriously." "I absolutely would," he interrupted, his voice steady and certain. Every person in the reception hall was watching now. Helen's eyes darted around desperately, searching for a sympathetic face, but finding none, not a single person rose to her defense. I watched the slow, dawning horror spread across her features as she realized she had completely, irrevocably destroyed her own standing. But Gregory wasn't finished. He turned to me, took my hand in his, and gave it a reassuring squeeze that sent warmth flooding back into my ice-cold fingers. Then he turned back to face my mother. "Before I forget, Helen," he said conversationally. Helen swallowed hard. "What now?" Gregory's smile grew wider. "You remember those financial protection documents you told Catherine were insulting and showed a lack of trust in family? The ones you insisted we didn't need because family always looks out for family?" She blinked rapidly. "Of course I remember." Gregory nodded. "Well," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "we signed them anyway." Helen froze completely. For a moment, I thought she might actually collapse right there on the reception hall floor. Gregory shrugged casually. "And here's the interesting part," he continued, his architect's precision evident in every word. "One of the key provisions explicitly maintains separation of our financial accounts, which means—" He gestured toward my phone, still displaying the empty balance. "You didn't just steal from me. You stole from a public school teacher's retirement fund." The remaining color drained from Helen's face until she looked almost gray. The whispers around the room grew louder as several of my colleagues, teachers, who understood exactly how precious and hard-earned that savings was, nodded in grim satisfaction. And just like that, my mother realized she wasn't just facing her future son-in-law anymore. She was dealing with me, the daughter whose career choices she'd belittled for years, and the entire education community that had become my true family. The look in my eyes told her she was about to regret everything she'd ever done. Helen stood there frozen, her perfectly made-up face contorting as her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Her eyes darted frantically around the reception hall, clearly expecting someone, anyone, to step up and defend her. Nobody did. Not a single person. The panic that spread across her features was almost painful to watch. "Gregory, sweetheart," she said, her voice honeyed but trembling, "let's not be hasty about this. We're family." But Gregory wasn't listening anymore. He put his phone on speaker just as Trevor's professional voice came through clearly for everyone to hear. "Mr. Wells, We flag these unauthorized transactions as potential fraud. Since the receiving account belongs to a family member, I should inform you that pursuing this will likely result in serious consequences. Do you want me to contact our fraud department and proceed with a full investigation? Helen lunged forward with surprising speed, her manicured fingers clawing at Gregory's phone. Hang up that phone right now. We can discuss this like adults. Gregory pulled back, his expression hardening into something I'd never seen before. Yes, Trevor. Proceed immediately. Helen's sharp intake of breath seemed to echo through the silent reception hall. You cannot possibly do this to your own mother-in-law, to Catherine's mother. Gregory looked directly into her eyes. You brought this on yourself, Helen. Trevor continued professionally. I understand. We'll begin reversing the transactions and notify the relevant authorities. This will trigger an automatic freeze on the recipient's accounts while we investigate. I should inform you that if our fraud team confirms these findings, legal action will likely follow. Legal action? Helen's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't heard since my childhood tantrums. No, absolutely not. Tell them to stop immediately. Gregory, fix this right now. But Gregory wasn't finished. Don't worry, Helen, he said, his architect's precision making each word cut deeper. I'll make sure you don't face criminal charges, initially. His tone shifted subtly. But your access to that money? That's completely over. You won't touch a penny of Catherine's teaching savings ever again. I watched something dark and dangerous flicker across my mother's face. What she did next shocked everyone in the room. With wild desperation in her eyes, she turned her fury directly at me. This is all your fault, she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at my chest. You've always been ungrateful. You poisoned Gregory against me. He would never have done something like this if you hadn't corrupted him with your teacher's morality. I felt something shift inside me, the same strength I found when standing up for my students. My voice remained calm but carried throughout the room. I didn't make you steal our honeymoon fund, Mom. Your own entitlement did that. Helen's eyes darted frantically around the room, searching desperately for a sympathetic face. Finding none, something seemed to break inside her. Then, like a cornered animal finding new strength, her expression changed, in a way that sent ice through my veins. She smiled, a calculated, unsettling smile I recognized from countless childhood confrontations. Very well, she said with artificial sweetness. If I can't access the money, then neither will you too. Before I could process what was happening, she reached into her designer handbag, pulled out her phone, and began furiously tapping the screen. My heart pounded against my ribs. Mom, what are you doing now? Helen's smile grew more vindictive. Just making an important call, she said with false casualness. You see, darling, I might not have access to your precious teacher's fund anymore, but I still have other ways to make sure you don't get your fairy tale ending. She hit the call button, and when she spoke, her voice dripped with artificial politeness. Hello, yes. This is Helen Madison. I need to report fraudulent activity on my daughter's wedding account. My stomach twisted violently. I instantly understood her plan. She was trying to sabotage us by falsely reporting fraud on our wedding expenses account, which could trigger investigations into all our finances and freeze the honeymoon funds we'd just recovered. You're unbelievable, I exclaimed, years of restrained frustration breaking through. But Gregory moved with surprising swiftness. He plucked the phone from her hand and activated the speaker function. Ma'am, the bank representative said professionally, you're reporting suspected fraud. Can you confirm your relationship to the account holder? Helen hesitated, suddenly realizing her position. Her lips twitched nervously. She glanced between Gregory and me, cornered. Gregory raised a questioning eyebrow. Go ahead, Helen. Tell them exactly whose account you're reporting as compromised. Helen swallowed visibly. Well, it's my daughter's wedding account. The representative's tone sharpened immediately. Ma'am, unless you are listed as an authorized user or joint account holder, you cannot report fraud on someone else's account. Making false fraud reports constitutes a serious offense with potential legal ramifications. Helen's expression crumbled. Her eyes darted wildly around the room as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. And Gregory, he actually laughed. a quiet, measured laugh that made me fall in love with him all over again. "Oh, Helen," he said, shaking his head like a teacher disappointed with a student. "You really can't stop yourself, can you?" Helen's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Her hands trembled visibly. I. I was just trying to. Before she could finish, her phone buzzed with an incoming notification. She glanced at the screen and visibly paled. Gregory's lips curved knowingly. "Your bank alerting you about account restrictions?" She didn't need to answer because at that exact moment, Audrey, the school district's legal counsel who had become my friend over years of classroom collaborations, rose gracefully from her seat at the nearby table. "Helen," she said with professional calm, "as you might recall from our introduction earlier, I'm an attorney specializing in financial crimes." Helen's eyes widened with genuine fear. Audrey continued, her voice carrying easily through the silent reception hall. "What you've just attempted constitutes fraud, false reporting, and potentially identity theft. You've committed these actions in front of approximately 50 witnesses, including several education professionals and legal experts." Whispers rippled through the reception. Several of my colleagues nodded firmly. Helen staggered backward like she'd been physically struck. "I wasn't actually going to." Audrey raised her hand, cutting off the excuse with the same authority she used in courtrooms. "Save your explanations. My professional advice would be to address this situation immediately before it escalates further." Helen turned to Gregory, desperation etched in every line of her face. "Gregory, you can't possibly allow this to happen. I'm Catherine's mother." Gregory regarded her steadily for a long, deliberate moment. Then he smiled gently. "You created this situation yourself, Helen." Helen made us sound like a wounded animal. "Please, Gregory." Gregory simply shrugged, his arm sliding around my waist. "Enjoy your new accommodations, Helen," he said evenly. "They may not offer river views like that European cruise, but I hear the state provides 3 meals a day." Helen's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely, and in that moment, I saw something I'd waited decades to witness, my mother finally understanding that her control over me was permanently broken. Helen stood there paralyzed. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup stark against her ashen skin. Her hands trembled visibly at her sides. She had lost control, not just of the situation, but of the narrative she'd carefully constructed her entire life. The realization was written across her features, but that didn't mean she was ready to surrender. "This is absolutely absurd," she scoffed, forcing a brittle laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Are you both seriously going to destroy your wedding celebration over what amounts to a simple family misunderstanding? What will your students think, Catherine?" Something snapped inside me, the protective instinct I developed from years of standing up for my third graders. I stepped forward, my wedding dress rustling with the movement. "A misunderstanding?" My voice vibrated with a fury I rarely allowed myself to express. "You systematically drained my teacher's retirement account, money I saved for 5 years. Dollar by dollar from my classroom paychecks. You spent it on luxury items for yourself, and then tried to commit additional fraud in front of everyone who matters to me. That's not a misunderstanding, Mom. That's a calculated betrayal and a criminal act." Helen's practiced smile faltered noticeably. "Catherine, you're being completely..." But I wasn't finished. The words poured out of me like a dam breaking after years of pressure. "You've always acted like I owe you something for choosing my own path," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Like my career choices, my money, my life decisions somehow belong to you because you're my mother. But guess what?" I looked her directly in the eyes for what felt like the first time. "They don't. They never did." Several of my colleagues and students' parents applauded openly. Helen's head snapped around, her eyes flashing with indignation at those who dared challenge her authority. But she wasn't just losing control of the wedding reception, she was losing her lifelong grip on me, her daughter. Gregory crossed his arms, his architect's posture perfectly balanced and resolute. "You know what, Helen?" He exhaled slowly, the way he did when making a crucial decision about a building design. "This is actually the perfect moment to share something I've been carefully considering for months." Helen's body tensed visibly. "What are you talking about?" Gregory's gaze remained steady. "Catherine has been torn between her love for you and her need to live her own life for as long as I've known her. She spent years trying to earn your approval while still honoring her passion for teaching. The only reason we included you so deeply in our wedding planning was because Catherine desperately hoped you might finally respect her choices. But you can't, and after tonight, we're establishing clear boundaries. Helen's eyes widened in shock. You. You can't possibly mean. Gregory's voice remained calm but absolutely resolute. I do. We both do. Helen recoiled as though she'd been physically struck. The reception hall grew utterly silent. Every guest watched intently, witnessing the culmination of what many had obviously seen building for years. Gregory turned to me, took my hand tenderly in his, and pressed his lips against my fingers in a gesture of absolute solidarity. Then he faced my mother again. You violated Catherine's trust, he said with measured precision. So now we're redefining our relationship with you. Helen swallowed hard, her throat working convulsively. You no longer have unrestricted access to your daughter's life. Several guests gasped audibly. Helen's entire body began to tremble. You don't mean that, she whispered, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. I found my voice, speaking the words I'd rehearsed in my mind countless times, but never had the courage to say. I do mean it, Mom. Starting tonight, our relationship exists on my terms. No unannounced visits to my classroom. No criticizing my career, no financial interference. If you want to be part of my life, you'll respect my boundaries and my choices. Helen's breathing became rapid and shallow. No, no. Catherine, you can't do this to me. I'm your mother. I gave you everything. I only wanted what was best for you. My expression softened slightly, but my resolve remained firm. And that's exactly why I'm doing this. Because sometimes what's best for me is making my own decisions, even when they're different from what you would choose. Something in Helen finally broke. Her carefully maintained composure shattered completely. Her face contorted with decades of thwarted control, her entire body trembling with emotion. Then, like the tantrum I'd witnessed countless times in my classroom from children who'd never heard no, she let out a piercing wail. She actually stamped, her designer heel against the floor, her perfectly styled hair coming undone. You ungrateful, foolish. Gregory gently took my hand and turned us away from the scene. Come on, Catherine. Let's go celebrate with the people who truly support us. And just like that, we walked away from her, leaving Helen standing alone, surrounded by witnesses to her own undoing. But the most satisfying part? This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something much more powerful than revenge. The aftermath. Helen's unraveling. The following days brought a cascade of consequences that no one, perhaps not even Helen herself, could have anticipated. Trevor, our financial advisor, moved with remarkable efficiency. Every dollar Helen had diverted from my teacher's retirement fund was methodically restored to our accounts within 72 hours. Her substantial property deposit, revoked. Her European River cruise reservation, canceled with a strongly worded explanation to the company. Her investment accounts were temporarily frozen pending the fraud investigation. Her own financial institution flagged her portfolio for suspicious activity, restricting her access to her considerable assets while they conducted their own internal review. The professional repercussions hit harder than the financial ones. The State Real Estate Licensing Board received a formal ethics complaint. While they deliberated, Helen's former colleagues distanced themselves quickly, unwilling to risk their own reputations by association. 30 years of carefully cultivated business relationships crumbled in a matter of days. Audrey, the school district's legal counsel, ensured Helen received an official visit from financial crimes investigators. They didn't lead her away in handcuffs, as Gregory had half-jokingly predicted, but they delivered a formal warning that any additional attempts at financial interference would result in immediate criminal charges. Helen's face, according to the officer who visited our apartment afterward, had been a study in disbelief as her social standing collapsed around her. The social fallout was perhaps most painful for a woman who had built her identity on appearances. Word traveled rapidly through our community, especially among the education circles that had become my true family. Parents of my students sent supportive notes. Colleagues checked in daily. Even Helen's country club acquaintances began declining her lunch invitations, unwilling to be seen with someone who would steal from her own daughter's teacher retirement savings. But the most meaningful conclusion? The genuine joy that followed. 2 months after our wedding, Gregory and I embarked on our honeymoon after all, an enriching educational tour through historical Greek islands, significantly upgraded from our original plans. The entire trip was funded by an astonishing collection organized by my school community, with parents, fellow teachers, and even former students contributing to ensure we experienced the educational journey I had dreamed about for years. My third graders helped create a special travel journal for me to document architectural and historical discoveries to share with future classes. We posted daily educational updates about ancient ruins and cultural insights, tagging our supportive community in each one. Helen? According to my cousin who still followed her social media, she viewed every single post, her bitter comments to mutual connections revealing how deeply the images of our happiness affected her. In our final analysis, Helen lost something far more precious than money that day. She lost the daughter she had tried to control, the respect of her peers, and most importantly, the illusion that she could manipulate people without consequences. And the most powerful lesson of all? She orchestrated this outcome through her own choices. Gregory and I returned to our lives with a newfound sense of peace. My classroom became an even more joyful space now that I no longer carried the weight of trying to earn my mother's approval. Our relationship continued, with carefully maintained boundaries, brief, structured interactions that Helen grudgingly accepted as the only connection available to her. We're building our life on our own terms, creating a home filled with books, imagination, and the values I teach my students every day. Because ultimately, the most meaningful victory isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about creating a life of purpose and authenticity. And Helen? She's learning, perhaps for the first time, that even mothers must eventually face the consequences of their own actions.